The Philippines was right at the top of my list for places to move to after Thailand. For a long time, if you'd asked me which country in Southeast Asia I would consider as a serious backup or alternative to Thailand, my answer, aside from Malaysia, would have been the Philippines. And I want to be clear about why. Because the reasons were real, and I still think they were valid reasons at the time I held them. The Philippines felt more authentic Southeast Asia than Thailand did by the mid-2010s. It was rougher around the edges, it had not been polished for the foreign tourist in the way Thailand had. Going there felt more adventurous, more genuine, more like the Southeast Asia I'd first fallen for as a young man in Bangkok in the 2000s. The English language was a huge plus. You could actually have proper conversations with people. There was regional diversity from Manila to Cebu to Palawan to Mindanao, which meant there was more to explore than Thailand's fairly narrow set of familiar destinations. And the general sense that the Philippines had not yet fully mapped by the Western expat industry meant there was still an element of discovery available that Thailand had lost. So on paper, the Philippines was the country I would have moved to after Thailand. Not necessarily as a plan B, as the main plan, and if the country I recommended to people would have stayed the same, perhaps it would still be the case. But today, I want to explain why I've stopped recommending it, and why the Philippines has fallen off my list as an option I would consider seriously either for myself or for anyone who asked me for any advice. Now I need to be honest about the things I never fully got past before I get to the substantive argument, because I want to give you the full picture, not the airbrushed version of it. The food was the first thing. I never really got on with Filipino food. The local dishes are, in my honest opinion, some of the least appealing food I have ever eaten anywhere, not only in Southeast Asia, but all over the world. The wider range of Filipino cuisine, the dishes you would eat day by day, never appealed to me in the way any other regional cuisines did. That was a personal preference, not necessarily an objective judgment, but it mattered because food is a daily commitment when you live in a country, and I could not see myself eating like that for next 20 years. Then there was the price of decent Western food. Manila and Cebu are not cheap for the imported groceries. The good restaurants or the specific items a Western foreigner ends up wanting after a few months. The imported cheese, the decent wine, the proper coffee, the reasonable steak, the fresh berries, all of it cost more than it would in Bangkok, and often more than it would back at home. So the cheap country pitch never quite held up on the food side. Then there was the movement problem. Getting around Manila is legitimately awful. The traffic is worse than Bangkok on Bangkok's worst day. The public transport is limited, the ride-share services work but not brilliantly, and the moment you leave Manila, the country becomes hard to navigate. Flights get cancelled, ferries don't turn up, local roads are variable, so the practical reality of getting around the country is worse than any comparable Southeast Asian destination. But none of these are the reasons I want to talk about today. Those are the quality of life preferences that a person could work around if they were committed to being in the country. What I want to talk about are the reasons that have accumulated over the past 3 or 4 years, and that, taken together, mean I can no longer, honestly, recommend the Philippines to anybody thinking about moving there. The first substantive reason is that the cost of living in the Philippines makes no sense when you measure it against the infrastructure and the quality of life you actually receive for the money. And this is the specific pattern that finally broke my recommendation because it's the pattern that everything else in the country flows from. Let me explain what I mean. In a functioning, cheap country, you accept lower standards in exchange for lower prices. That's the trade. You put up with variable electricity because your rent is a fraction of what it would be at home. You put up with slower internet because your groceries cost half of what they would back at home. You put up with basic public transport because your evening out costs a tenth of what it would in London or New York. The reduced quality is compensated by the reduced cost. The Philippines has broken that trade. You get the reduced quality without the reduced cost. Manila premium rent is now approaching what you would pay in secondary Western European cities. Cebu premium rent has followed, and that doesn't get the rent you get. Frequent power outages, power supply issues, water issues, the best condominiums still have them. Internet that struggles when the weather turns, and roads that are pockmarked and dangerous. A public transport system that barely functions, and traffic that makes a 5-kilometer journey take an hour. Airports that queue for 2 hours to get through immigration when they are quiet. Then look at what a foreigner actually pays for day to day. A decent supermarket shop in Manila costs more than the equivalent shop in Bangkok. A good restaurant meal costs more than the same meal in Bangkok. A gym membership at a decent facility runs at Bangkok prices. Health insurance runs higher than Bangkok. A dentist visit at a Western standard clinic costs more than Thailand. Private schooling for expat families runs at genuinely international rates. And the electricity bill on top of all of that comes in at rates significantly higher than most other regional destinations because the Philippines' power grid is expensive to run and unreliable to depend on. So what you have in a country that charges you close to Western prices for the things that you actually want to buy, while providing you with infrastructure that is closer to the standard of a much poorer country. The arithmetic to me doesn't balance, and the specific consequence for the Western retiree is that the pension that was supposed to stretch further in the Philippines actually stretches further in Malaysia, in Vietnam or in Cambodia, and even in some specific ways in Thailand. The premium that the Philippines charges is real, and it's not justified by what the country provides in return. The second reason is that the level of scrutiny on the Western foreigner in the Philippines has increased exponentially, and it's going to keep increasing. The Bureau of Immigration has tightened its practices. The Bureau of Internal Revenue is now taking tax residency questions more seriously. The banking system has come under US Treasury scrutiny because of the wider regional money laundering issues. And Philippine banks are asking questions of foreign customers that they did not used to ask. The specific practical result is that the Western retiree who moved to the Philippines in 2015 believing he could live a quiet life on his pension is now facing paperwork verification requests, tax filings, and banking friction that were not part of the deal when he arrived. And these are just going to intensify over the coming decades as the country pulls in tighter regulatory frameworks and gets pulled along by international pressure on capital flows and financial transparency. The Philippines, that seemed loosely regulated in 2015, is going to become significantly more tightly regulated by 2030, and the foreign resident is going to feel every step of that tightening. The third reason connects to what I have covered in recent videos. The Philippine property market, whether you're buying or renting, does not offer the Western foreigner good value. The foreign quota rules for condominiums, the impossibility of owning land, the developer practices around the contract to sell model, the title release delays, the special assessment exposure once you own, and the exit liquidity problems when you try to sell all combine to make property ownership in the Philippines a genuinely poor decision for the Western foreigner. Even renting has become more expensive and less predictable. Manila premium rentals have moved substantially in the past 3 years. Cebu premium rentals have followed along. The specific expectation that the Western foreigner had of finding a very comfortable place to live in at a very reasonable cost has been quietly undermined by the same forces that are moving prices in the whole region. And the retiree who moved out on a modest pension is now finding that his housing budget is being squeezed year on year with no reversal in sight. Now, the fourth reason actually follows on directly from the property issue, and it's the one that ultimately made the property question so much worse than it already was. The infrastructure in the Philippines is not just poor, it's actively declining year on year in ways that make owning or renting property in the country a bet against the country's own trajectory. Let me be specific about what I actually mean. The typhoons that hit the Philippines every year are getting worse. Not in your imagination, not in the news framing, but measurably, statistically worse. Storm intensity is increasing, storm surges are higher, the damage to coastal and low-lying areas is more comprehensive than it used to be. And the country's response to this has been almost nothing. The dikes are not being reinforced, the drainage in the major cities has not been upgraded. The building codes have not been tightened in the way they should have been. Manila still floods in ways that a functioning administration would have addressed a decade ago. Cebu still floods, every provincial city floods. Then look at the power grid. Brownouts are not an occasional inconvenience. They are a regular feature of life in the Philippines, including in the premium condominium towers that many foreign residents actually live in. The grid is old, poorly maintained, and expensive to run because so much of the power generation is imported diesel. When a storm hits, whole regions can be without power for days. When demand spikes on a hot day, the grid trips. When a substation needs maintenance, the response time is measured in weeks rather than hours. And the price of power to the consumer is one of the highest in Southeast Asia, while the reliability is one of the lowest. Then the water. In the major cities, water supply is not reliable enough to depend on. Even the premium buildings have holding tanks because the municipal supply cannot be relied on to run when you need it. Water quality is variable enough that no resident actually drinks straight from the tap, so the foreigner is paying premium condominium prices and still buying bottled water for cooking. Then the roads. The Manila road network is in a state that would embarrass a functioning municipality. Potholes go unrepaired for years, traffic management is chaotic, pedestrian infrastructure barely exists, and the moment you leave the capital, the national road network deteriorates quickly. Some of the tourist routes have been improved, but the day-to-day roads that ordinary residents drive on are patchy, dangerous, and getting worse rather than better. Now put all this together with the property picture. You're buying or renting a premium unit in a country whose infrastructure is deteriorating year on year, while at the same time getting more expensive relative to back at home. This makes no sense. You are paying Western adjacent prices for accommodation in a city where the roads, the power, the water, the drainage, and the internet are all getting worse, and the trajectory is not going to reverse because the political system does not have the incentive structure to reverse it. The people setting policy in Manila are not personally affected by the brownouts because they are on their own generators. They are not affected by the floods because they live above the floodplain. They are not affected by the internet because they have direct fiber connection, so the incentive to fix what is broken does not exist at the level where the fixing would have to happen. So put all that together. The cost of living makes no sense for what you get. The regulatory scrutiny has increased and is going to keep increasing. The property market is a trap I have covered in detail elsewhere, and the infrastructure that all of it depends on is not being maintained, let alone upgraded, at the pace the country's own ambitions would require. Any of those issues on its own would be manageable for the Western retiree willing to accept the trade-offs. 2 of them at once would be enough to give me pause, all of them at once, and I cannot, in good faith, recommend the Philippines to anybody who asks me for advice on where to move in Southeast Asia. Because the Philippines that seemed like the answer in 2015 is not the Philippines that will be waiting for you in 2035, and the trajectory the country is on is not the one the marketing campaign suggests. If you are considering the Philippines, my honest advice would be to be very careful. Visit properly first over several trips in different seasons and specifically visit the parts of the country you have never seen before, deciding that Manila or Cebu are the right base. Talk to Western foreigners who have been in the country for 10 years or longer, not the ones who arrived last year and are still in the honeymoon phase. Understand that the country is going to change materially over the next decade, and that the arrangement that you sign up for at 50 may not be the arrangement waiting for you at 65. Rent, don't buy. Keep your capital in your home jurisdiction. Do not put your pension into a Filipino partner's name that you cannot afford to lose, and plan for the possibility that you will want to leave, because the option to leave is more valuable than most Western foreigners realize until they need it. The Philippines was a country I recommended for a long time. It was the country I would have moved to if Thailand had ever stopped working. It's not that country anymore, and I would rather say so honestly, even at the cost of the comments section, and pretend the trajectory is still the one I could support. Thanks for tuning in to today's deep dive, guys. I really do appreciate it. Hope you consider joining the channel as a member. I mean, the Thailand channel, that is. I don't even have membership on this channel. Anyway, catch you in the next one, and bye for now.